feel funny reading this. Get my glasses out because I know most of you know who she is. She's like I don't even want to say a little candle can chase away darkness, which we need to all be little candles chasing away darkness and exposing all this stuff that's just nonsense going on to hurt our families and our lifestyle. But Cathie's like a bonfire. She just brings light on all of this stuff, and so I'm so thankful for her. But as you guys mostly know, she has been observing the United Nations, which that in itself, if that was the only thing on here, that would be huge. But she has been observing the United Nations design a green climate fund. As an observer of the major UN conferences since 1995, Cathie enjoys telling about her experiences. She attended the Women's Conference in Beijing, China, the Housing Summit in Istanbul, Turkey, the Food Summit in Rome, Italy, and a number of climate change meetings in Kyoto. Japan, Buenos Aires, Argentina, but I could just go on and on. Germany, all these countries. I'm not even going to go to all those countries. Just name a country and she's probably been there. She's attended the 2000 Millennium Summit in New York City and the Global Taxing Summit in Monterrey, Mexico, the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, South Africa. And she's been to Hong Kong for a ministerial meeting of the World Trade Organization and to Paris, France for a UNESCO meeting. So we're just really, really happy to have Cathie, so if y'all would help me give her a great round of applause.
I sent you an email if you want to send it
so that you can hopefully be interested in what we're doing in the future. Right now, we have a couple of bills going on in Austin, Texas, that if you sign up, you will get notified about. Concerning the Agenda 21 issue, I think that these couple of bills might be very interesting for you to hear as the machine gets focused on where we're going. And one of them is a smart growth project. How many of you have heard of smart growth? This is a way of master planning our economy, master planning our lives, our activities, our living, our families. And I don't like master planning. I will tell you that. I like freedom and liberty. And so these kind of plans are not American at all. Complete Streets is a program under Smart Growth. And complete streets means that you would not only have a road being built, as is a toll road being built right now in Collin County, which is just north of Dallas. But it has to have a bicycle lane because the federal government says it has to have a bicycle lane. The county judge, the county commissioners are all like, this is crazy. This is dangerous to have a 70-mile-an-hour zone with a bicycle lane next to it. But it's required because it's smart growth. And of course, as I was listening to Mark Levin tonight, as best I could, coming out this far east away from my station, but he's talking about this very thing in how the CAFE standards, how many miles per gallon that our cars would be required to get, is increasing and increasing. It's now going to be way over 50 miles an hour. And for us to drive any kind of car that would get that many miles per gallon is going to be a very dangerous venture. And so people don't want them. They don't want the electric volt. For one reason, the volts, when they plug them into their electrical outlets, burn down their houses. I mean, this is not smart. But anyway, smart cars are dumb because they're very dangerous. And so smart growth is one of the things that we are dealing with in the Texas legislature, and you will find out more about that if you sign up on our list. Bob Dewell from Greenville, Texas is the Senate author, and Linda Harper Brown from Irving, Texas is the House author. So very dangerous, I think. Another bill that we're dealing with in Austin deals with smart meters. Smart meters. Anyone have a smart meter in their house? These are 16 gigabyte computers that are going onto the side of our homes. What in the world is anybody going to do with a 16 gigabyte computer on your house? What is the future plan of these? So our proposal in legislation is that if you want to put this thing on your house, if the power company wants to put that in your house, we want that option. I mean, it's our home. And we want to know what the negative impact might be. Is there a health impact putting that size of a machine on your home? Also, in the nation of Switzerland right now, the smart meters on the homes are already able to turn off washers and dryers during certain hours of the day. So why do we want a central office to be able to turn off our washers and dryers at certain times of the day? My dad and I just had 11 people living in our home with my husband and son, his wife, and 5 grandchildren for about 6 months. And my washer was going 24/7. I would not want a central office turning off my washer and dryer. I would be quite unhappy if they did that. But smart meters are pretty much already in most urban areas in Texas. And so we are looking at what the future plans are. We should know what the plan is with these and have protections for our own privacy, for our own security. And the other thing that we're very interested in is the fact that Texas right now has our own electrical grid. And that is a very good thing. We are only state in the union with our own grid. And we want to keep it that way. Because I think what is coming down the pike, just like with the complete streets, and the reason they have bicycle lanes, they want us out of cars. I mean, that's obvious. They want us out of cars. But also, if they can take over our grid and say that half of your energy is going to have to be renewable, that means wind and solar. But folks, as you and I know, but Barack Hussein Obama has not figured out, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. So that's a very undependable source of energy, where nuclear is dependable, natural gas is dependable, coal is dependable, and these are clean burning energy sources. So that is the battle. If you want to control everybody everywhere all the time, what do you control? Carbon. Carbon. Carbon dioxide, which is emitted when you breathe out. It is not a pollutant. And carbon dioxide, it is also emitted when fossil fuels are burned. That's what this is all about. So do not be taken in. With that, let's figure out how in the world we got there. It all began even before this time, but in earnest, in 1972. The United Nations began what they called Earth Summits, because they have been diligently looking ever since their founding at a way to have a global government. How do you control everybody everywhere all the time? Control carbon. There's a brand new book out by Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma. It's called The Climate Hoax, H-O-A-X, The Climate Hoax, and I highly recommend the book. And in it, Senator Inhofe makes the very clear statement: you control carbon, you control capital. So, very, very intense efforts to control people everywhere all the time. So in 1972 was the very first Earth Summit meeting. 20 years later, they held the second one in Rio de Janeiro. That was a really big one. They'd had 20 years to plan from 72 to 92, and they wanted to make sure that one was going to be very big. So they did have a big meeting. 172 governments attended. There are 193 members of the United Nations today. When 172 out of 193 show up, that's a lot. That's a big meeting. And also at that meeting was our own president, 108 heads of state, including our own president, George H.W. Bush. Now, our president went to Rio de Janeiro to sign 2 documents. 2. One was a treaty that we will be seeing came out of this meeting in 1992 called a climate change treaty. That's why I've already introduced you to climate change and James Inhofe and carbon dioxide. Okay? So he went there to sign the climate change treaty. He also went there to sign Agenda 21. So many people say, well, what's the big deal? This is a UN document. Who cares? This is the American government. We're all powerful. We're the only superpower, so who cares? Well, why did our president go there, and why did he sign 2 documents? That's what we will continue to see. Why and what and how. 2012, just last year in June, the United Nations went back to Rio de Janeiro. They called it Rio plus 20 because it was 20 years after the original Rio meeting. What they're after is a legally binding treaty, and we will see the status of that as we go along. Now, you've already heard from Lori a very important facet of all of this, and that is, as you see in this bottom right-hand corner, and you also see something called an Earth Charter, which you've just heard about. This is a document that Mikhail Gorbachev and the man who headed both the 1972 and 1992 Earth summits have embraced. It is worshiping the creation instead of the creator. That is the big issue here. There was one artist who looked at it and thought it was such a holy document that she designed this ark, as you see in the bottom right-hand corner. That ark was presented at a 1992 meeting in Johannesburg, South Africa, in order to contain this Earth Charter. So it is seen as a religious document. Politically, you should understand who this man was who headed those 1972 and 1992 meetings and attended the 2012 meeting, but because he's elderly, he did not lead that meeting. But this is Maurice Strong, and what he said is that current lifestyle and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class, involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work air conditioning, and suburban housing are what? Not sustainable. We're going to see where that word came from in just a moment. But we know now about Maurice Strong, the man who headed that. Spiritually, the man was targeting the middle class. There is a political philosophy that targets the middle class, and it is socialism, Marxism, okay? And spiritually, we know where Maurice Strong was coming from because of his embrace of the Earth Charter, worshiping the earth instead of the creator, worshiping the creation instead of the creator. Now, where did this sustainable word come from? It came out of a document written in 1987. So right in between that 1972 and 92 meeting is another meeting called the World Commission on Environment and Development, and for the first time this phrase was developed, sustainable development. The woman who headed that meeting is a self-proclaimed humanist, so she's going to become her own god. We know spiritually where she is. Politically, we know because she was the first vice president of Socialist International and the former prime minister of Norway, what her political leanings are as well. Here's something that she said. Changing the attitudes of people everywhere is a fundamental prerequisite if the priorities of human society and therefore of human government are to be rewritten. You and I as Americans are not interested in rewriting our government, but they are. They're very intent on rewriting our government. And so the whole battle that we are seeing played out on the national stage, with one right after another in our Bill of Rights being undermined. Just yesterday in Austin, Texas, there was a man who took in an ACLU lawyer in order to undermine religious liberty. An amendment that we would like to get in our state constitution. And Joe Poyman, Texas Alliance for Life, decided, I'm going to take an ACLU lawyer in there and I'm going to kill him. And he did his best. So our rights are being undermined. And we have to stand up. We have to understand what's going on and we have to do something about it. Now, sustainable development. This phrase came out of this meeting. We know what the person was like who headed this meeting, this Gro Harlem Brundtland, but there is a picture that describes also sustainable development, and that is in the top right-hand corner. It is social, economic, and environmental justice, and the word justice can be interchanged with equity. Economic justice, economic equity means the same thing. In documents being presented right now by the federal government to our state Public Utility Commission and Railroad Commission, those that are overseeing the energy in this state, energy and energy production in our state, are talking about environmental justice. Comes right out of this, folks. The good news is we have a man who is chairing right now our Railroad Commission, our energy production, who understands what this is all about. And he is not buying into it. So it takes eternal vigilance. Sustainable development, according to the United Nations, is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Who can argue against that? It sounds logical enough, right? The problem is, how is that implemented? The way it's implemented is that it's a framework of rules and regulations. To do what? Limit the behavior of individuals, businesses, and organizations to what? Those approved by government. When Ronald Reagan stood in front of the Brandenburg Gate and called on Gorbachev to tear down this wall, do you think he was just talking about a physical wall? No, folks. He was talking about the rules and regulations that deprive those people of their freedoms and deprive their economy of the freedom it needed to work. That is what is going on in America right now. The rules and regulations to stifle our economy, to destroy our economy, to take away your liberties. That's what's going on. That's what the green economy is all about. It is not about clean air and clean water. It is about rules and regulations to take away your liberties and take away your free markets. That's it in a nutshell. Here is an American college girl who was at a UN meeting I attended a couple of years ago in Cancun, Mexico. This girl was very proud to turn around and let me take a picture of her t-shirt, which says, "Liberate the soil." How many of you think that liberating the soil means tilling the soil? This girl meant to leave it fallow, to leave it alone. Why? Because it's holy. It's all part of this earth worship. That's why E is capitalized in our children's textbooks today. It's grievous to see this kind of thing happen. Liberate the soil, undam the rivers. Folks, this is not happening, to my knowledge, in the state of Texas, but it is happening in California. They are undamming the rivers. Why? Well, because that river has to return to its natural state in order to save all the endangered species. Let the bugs defend themselves. You know, the fishes will make it. But this girl is saying undam the rivers, and they're doing that in California. They're doing it. And you all know about the Klamath Falls and the lack of irrigation now to very fertile land in California. Why? Because they're protecting some kind of a snail? They tried this in our Permian Basin in Texas. And it took a lawsuit by Greg Abbott, our Attorney General, in order to free us from the federal clinches that wanted, because of a lizard, to shut down the Permian Basin, the most productive area for oil drilling in Texas. What are they after? They're after our economy. They're after our liberty. They're out to control us. That's what this is all about. That's what sustainable development is all about. So, free the people. This girl, the spoiled little girl that she was, did not realize that she was there on Mommy and Daddy's dime and had all the liberties that anybody on earth could ever dream of having. And I will say, as a woman, women are treated so beautifully in this country that I grieve over the fact that we now have a man in the White House who wants to send our daughters into combat. I mean, how tragic can we get? How much of this ever came up during the presidential debates? How much of this defense of our traditions did you hear, or our constitutions did you hear, Constitution, during the debates? None of it. It's tragic. So unplug the empire, this girl thinks, is the way to go. Unplug the American empire, she thinks, is the way to go. Totally deceived, totally brainwashed. So this leads us to this 1992 Earth Summit. And I can tell you that since 1995, as you heard, I've been to many places, and no, there are a lot of countries I haven't been to, but anyway, attending United Nations meetings. And I have only seen 2 treaties since I've been attending since 1995. One was in 1997, the Kyoto Protocol that we're going to be hearing more about in Kyoto, Japan, and that's the capping of greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide. Why? Well, because our U.S. Senate signed a unanimously passed resolution telling the administration at the time, which was Clinton and Gore, don't go to Kyoto, Japan and get us into any treaty that is not going to be equally applied across the board to every nation, and don't bring home any treaty that's going to hurt the American economy. And the Kyoto Protocol was apt to destroy both. And it did not meet those standards. So, the Kyoto Protocol in 1997 and 1998, the International Criminal Court was created. So the United Nations now has 3 branches of government. They're just waiting for a tax. And that's in the plan here. The 3 branches, executive, legislative, judicial, thanks to this 1998 treaty signed in Rome, Italy, created by the World Federalists Association. You look that up. And they make no secret about being Marxist. They want a world government. They make no secret about it. So, at this meeting, 1992, 3 treaties, 3, unheard of. One dealing with desertification, one with climate change, and one with biological diversity. Let's look at them individually. The desertification treaty, you would think might have something to do with deserts. I mean, that's what its logo denotes. Instead, what it does is it grants the United Nations control over natural resources, controlling the use of 70% of the Earth's land. And our U.S. Senate ratified this unknowingly. It was in a bundle of 34 treaties brought to the Senate floor, and they didn't know that the desertification treaty was part of it. So, some people ask, well, can we unsign it? Can we get out of it? Well, I asked that question of a former majority leader, Dick Armey, who told me that once you sign a treaty and it's global like this, the tentacles are almost impossible to bring back in. So the United States has ratified that treaty. And its companion, by the way, is the UN Commission on Water for the 21st Century. And if there is one thing that is being debated in Austin, Texas right now, it is water. And one of the things that I want to warn you about, if you have your own well, don't let the government put a meter on it. You don't need it. Just don't bother with it. The second treaty after desertification was climate change. And as I say, our president went to Rio de Janeiro to sign 2 documents, Agenda 21 and the Climate Change Treaty. He was also the president who called for what in a State of the Union address? A new world order. Folks, the new world order is the Climate Change Treaty. If you can find an issue to control everybody, everywhere, all the time, it's the Climate Change Treaty. You control the air that you breathe out, the air that is emitted when energy is burned, fossil fuels are burned, then you can control everybody, everywhere, all the time. That's what this is all about. It led, after this 1992 ratification by the U.S. Senate, yes, he brought it home, rammed it through the Senate in the same year, requiring, of course, two-thirds Senate approval. It led then, 5 years later, to the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol, let me explain that in a nutshell, is a treaty that imposes greenhouse gas emissions caps on only 37 out of 193 nations. 37. So, if an American wants to build a new industry or grow an existing industry, you have to buy the right to do so from some other nation. I heard the nation of Colombia bragging that for the Americans to buy the right to burn fossil fuels from Colombia would bring in more money than their emerald industry. They were sitting there salivating over being able to melt the American economy. Well, this treaty also, in 2009 in Copenhagen, created a Green Climate Fund. Now, as I've already said, the UN has its 3 branches of government, but it doesn't have its own funding source yet. This is it, the Green Climate Fund. Ban Ki-moon, who is the Secretary General of the United Nations, has already called together a high-level advisory committee that he appointed. One of the men on the committee was George Soros, in order to come up with ideas to tax to fill the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund initially is to be $100 billion a year. Well, that sounds like, whoa, that's a lot of money. Globally, it's not. But where are they going to get that much money? Well, if they tax carbon, which is being talked about by Barack Obama, they can pull in way more than that. They can tax carbon and get trillions of dollars. Another idea that came out of this commission, how about taxing international monetary transactions? Trillions more. So if the United Nations gains the right to tax, which it does not have now, but it has let it be known it wants to, and this high-level advisory committee put together ideas of what to tax. Another idea was international shipping. Another one was international air travel. Another one was, hey, outer space. Who's paying rent for those satellites to be up in space? The United Nations says nobody is. Oh, and the sea lanes for all that traffic going here and there with these ships? They're not paying tax to anybody. They can pay it to us. They got plenty of ways to raise trillions, folks. So that was the climate change treaty, the second treaty, the first decertification, the second climate change, the third. Well, let's stop before we go to the third treaty, because you're going to understand something more about this Green Climate Fund. When I was in Doha, Qatar last December, the woman who heads is actually the executive director of the Climate Change Treaty. Her name is Christiana Figueres. She is from Costa Rica. Her father and her brother were both former presidents of Costa Rica, so she's very politically savvy, very politically well-positioned. Of course, money is no object to this girl, right? By the way, her brother today is deeply invested, as is Al Gore, in green energy, making billions. So if Christiana Figueres gets a new legally binding treaty, guess who's set to make a bundle of money off of it? Her own brother. And her too, I'm sure. But anyway, what she said is that we're going to leave Doha with another concrete step in the right direction. Well, what's the right direction? The complete transformation of the economic structure of the world. That's what she said. Does that sound like fundamental transformation to you? Does that sound like New World Order to you? It does to me. The complete transformation of the economic structure of the world. That's exactly what the Climate Change Treaty is intended to do. And we get another legally binding treaty to replace the Kyoto Protocol, and that's where we are, folks. And we're on the cusp of a global government. The future? We will have a legally binding treaty for all nations by 2015 and in effect by 2020. Oh, really? So, in 2013, this year, Christiana Figueres is calling together bureaucrats from nations around the globe in order to sit down and draft a new treaty, a new legally binding treaty concerning greenhouse gases. Why? Oh, remember those 3 things again? Control everybody, everywhere, all the time. There we go. Drop a new treaty. That's what we're doing this year, 2013. Then in 2014, Ban Ki-moon, who's the Secretary General of the United Nations, is calling together the heads of state. Do you think Barack Obama will want to be there? Probably, yeah. 2014, the heads of state come together. He bangs their heads together and says, hey, Bubbas, next year, 2015, we are hosting a meeting and you are going to send someone to be ready to sign a treaty. And once we get this legally binding treaty in place, then you're going to have 5 years to get it up and going in your country, and in 2020, we have a new fundamental transformation of the global economy. The third treaty is the Biological Diversity Treaty. And some of you, as I was talking with you before the meeting began, have already a good idea of what this one is. All of these areas in red on this map are off limits to humans. Off limits. As Reed Noss of the Wildlands Project said to explain this treaty, eventually a wilderness network would dominate a region with human habitations being the islands. So you and I would not be able to go into certain places on the earth because it's holy. They want us in stack and pack. So this is the third of the treaties: desertification, climate change, and biodiversity. Agenda 21. Here we go. This is the blueprint to implement all three of the treaties. All three of them. Doesn't matter that they're ratified or not. Makes no difference whatsoever. Agenda 21 is meant to implement them. It's a 300-page, 40-chapter blueprint. It is soft law. It is not a treaty. So it did not have to go through the U.S. Senate for ratification. Not that it mattered. And here's why it didn't matter. Because when President Bush lost and President Clinton took the reins in 1993, he signed an executive order creating the President's Council on Sustainable Development. What is Agenda 21? Sustainable development. Agenda 21 is the blueprint to implement sustainable development. So, here's our executive order, and what is its goal? Economic, environmental, and social equity. Oh my. And even though this executive order was back in 1993, once an executive order is written, it is embedded in federal bureaucracies. So today, every Texan from the state level, the county level, and the local level who applies for any grant has all of these strings attached to it to implement Agenda 21. And furthermore, they have what they call Council of Governments, COGS. I live in Dallas, the North Texas Council of Governments. I don't know what yours is called.
There's one
here.
right down the street.
Okay. The COGS are working outside our county commissioners' normal offices and outside our typical council chambers. They meet, they're elected officials, and here come all of these new directives from the feds. And it's like, oh, well, we can do that. Well, we can do that. We can do that. And I cannot tell you how many county commissioners have caught on to this. And they feel like they have been taken advantage of. They're not happy about it. One man in South Texas came to me and said, I am a county commissioner, but Cathie, I swear to you, I did not understand this until I read, in his case, The Green Mask, which is written by a Democrat who figured this out and said, no way, and is exposing the agenda. So, the President's Council on Sustainable Development, how could we ever get rid of it? What Ronald Reagan did in order to shrink the size of government, which in my lifetime is the only president who's ever gone out in earnest to shrink the size of government, he issued an executive order to direct the Office of Management and Budget to go into the federal bureaucracies and get rid of the fat. It could be done again. It could be done again. So, we will see whether that is done again in the future. In this President's Council on Sustainable Development, to help you understand how this works, and let me tell you folks, when I look at Hillary Clinton and her new embrace of homosexual marriages and all this kind of stuff, I look at one sad, sorry woman. She is just as radical left as Barack Obama is, and is Bill Clinton. They're all Saul Alinsky-ites. And we are not going to defeat them at their own game until we figure out that this is not America. This is not the way that we play as Americans. We have a constitutional republic. That means it is of, by, and for the people, a bottom-up kind of government. We elect people and we hold them to account. But this whole sustainable development thing And President's Council on Sustainable Development works from the top down. Whoa. And it uses a process called the collaborative decision-making process. And you probably have been Delphied or facilitated. And let me give you an example of how this works. I went to a Dallas City Council town hall meeting, and we were supposed to be discussing a bond package that was going to be on a ballot. How much were the taxpayers going to swallow is really what they were trying to find out. And so as we arrived at the meeting, they broke us into small groups, and I said, oh, I know it's coming. I'm going to be Delphied. And so I knew to be quiet during that meeting, but they're asking silly questions like, what would you like to see to make Dallas look beautiful? And someone might say, well, I'd like to see a river running down Main Street. And another one would say, yeah, and riverboat. Oh, I'd love to have rowboats on that river. And then at the end of this whole thing, and we got all these signs up all over the room telling us what beautiful Dallas would look like. Then they start asking us, how much would you approve on a bond package on the ballot? And one person might say, I'd approve $20 million for all these beautiful things. Somebody else say, you're cheap, I'd go 40. Somebody else say, you're really cheap, I'm going 80. And then they got to little homemaker Cathie, and they said, Cathie, how much would you approve? I said, 0, you've not made your case. I don't know how much this river's supposed to cost down Main Street, and you haven't even told me how much one rowboat's going to cost. So I'm not going for any of it. They just passed over me real quick. When I was going out that night, there was a man who followed me out, and he said, I wish we'd talked beforehand. I've got a degree in city planning, but I didn't know I could say 0. You're right, they did not make their case. They intimidate you into silence. That's what the process is all about. It is not the American way. As I say, it is a top-down process. It is a process used by the United Nations that intimidates people into silence. A very rare thing happened this week on the arms treaty that our president, I hate even giving him that title, but people did it to us. So in this new arms treaty, there was a very rare thing that happened. There was a vote. All because last year before the election, Barack Hussein Obama's name was on the ballot. He had to get elected. And so he didn't want this small arms treaty in there, because if that was in there, then they could be used against him. And so he put a cog in the works. And that forced it to come up at a later time, which it did this week, and it required a vote, which is a very rare thing at the United Nations. Typically what they do is they run by consensus. And that means that they intimidate you into silence if you disagree with them. In Durban, South Africa, they went 2 days late. By that time, people are tired, they're weary, they've got flights, they've got to get home. They throw up their hands and say, all right, I give in. You can have your way. The whole consensus process is a foredrawn conclusion. It is a conclusion that they will chuck down your throat. And they will intimidate you into silence. And when people give up, then the leader says, consensus is reached. There's no vote. This week, as I say, was a very, very rare thing, a vote. So the collaborative decision-making process is part of this President's Council on Sustainable Development, integrated policies to achieve what? Oh, social, economic, environmental equity. There we are. There's those 3 things. Stabilize the global human population. Folks, we don't know how many people are on the face of this earth, but every year the United Nations is trying to scare you into thinking that more people are on the face of the earth than what the earth can carry. We're running out of space. We're running out of food. We're running out of minerals. We can't keep growing. This last year, they looked down and they said, here's number 7 billion. It's a little girl in the Philippines. They have no idea. They don't know how many people been killed in that Arab Spring. They have no idea how many people live on the face of this earth. It is just fear and intimidation. They want to silence you into acquiescing to their agenda. And the last point, just look at this. Educate citizens to understand and support. That sound like brainwashing to you? Sure does to me. And I don't like it. So this is the collaborative decision-making process and the agenda, the We Believe statement that was signed by Bill Clinton. So Bill and Hillary Clinton are just as much Marxists, socialists, whatever word you want to call it, as is Barack Obama. The collaborative decision-making process, I don't want to underplay this. You've got to understand, in our democratic process, we elect officials that talk to us, tell us what they believe, we decide among candidates, and then after they're elected, we hold them to account. That is the give and take. Too often, we the people have elected them and then looked the other way and decided, oh well, I've done my job. No, we have got to stay with them. We've got to help them. It is our responsibility for good government. But that is what we do in a democratic process. But the consensus process is one where there's no choice in who represents you. Let me give you a good example again, the European Union. They don't elect the people that represent them in Brussels, Belgium. They elect people to represent them in their Bundestag, in their, in their government places in their individual nations. But those people are only now making about 15% of the laws that govern their countries. The rest of it is coming out of Brussels, Belgium, unelected bureaucrats. That's what this process leads to. There's no agreement, but there's an absence of expressed opposition because they will silence you. You're the dumb one. You're the disagreeable one. You're the one that doesn't want a beautiful city or whatever else they're going after. The first time I saw this, folks, was when Goals 2000 was being promoted in our communities across Texas. Sandy Kress is still having too much to say about education in the state of Texas, and I'm tired of it. He has no elected position, and he doesn't need to be put in a position of leadership. Okay, there's no agreement, but there's an absence of expressed opposition. There's no argument or debate, and it's spread by grants to every community. That's what the whole idea is. Smart growth. Like I've already told you, we have a bill right now, and it's going to have a hearing next week. You sign up on my list, and I hope to get that to you next week. But you can look for Smart Streets, or pardon me, Complete Streets. It's part of the Smart Growth Program. Almost 1,500 pages. It was a federal grant to the American Planning Association. I mean, you give a bunch of central planners a project and money, they can just central plan us into oblivion. And that's what smart growth is intended to do. And it conflicts with our Fourth Amendment. It conflicts with it. And I'm not willing already, any more than any of you, to give up my Fourth Amendment rights, or my First Amendment, or my Second Amendment, or any of the rest of them. In 1976, the United Nations met and in their preamble came up with what their philosophy is concerning property rights. Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. There's our word, there's our phrase. Public control of land use is therefore indispensable. That's the United Nations philosophy concerning property rights. That's not our philosophy. And there are bills right now filed in Austin, Texas on eminent domain, and folks, I'm going to fight with everything in me for our property rights. And I'm going to name one name because I really like this legislator, Lois Kolkhorst from Brenham, Texas, has got a good bill out there, and she's fighting for us too. You know, another bill, and I've already gone down and signed an affidavit in support of this bill. You know, in the city of San Antonio today, the kids have to wear RFID tags, chips, the very chips that will be on the back of hands and on foreheads eventually. The Castro brothers, I think that they have a third brother we don't know about, and his name is Fidel. I mean, San Antonio has gone off the map. It's like it doesn't even know what liberty is. It's scary. It's very scary what's going on. So she has got a bill against that, and I've gone and signed in support of that. Property rights. If you look at the Communist Manifesto, the #1 item that they want to take away is property rights. That's how important this is. Communism is not dead. It's just changed colors. It's green on the outside. It's like a watermelon. It's Marxist red on the inside, just as red as it's ever been. They also have visioning and challenge grants, and they have this process that they use again where they call together stakeholder groups. It's not what we the people come up with. They have stakeholders. They'll come into a community and they'll identify business, finance, education, local government officials. They'll call them all together. They sit down and they have a foregone conclusion in that Delphi process, in that facilitator, and he or she will start dragging them in. And when the whole meeting is over, most of them sit there and say, well, I came up with that idea on my own. I don't know what you're talking about. They've been so deceived. They've been so deceived. They have been hooked and totally taken in. But that's what they do in this process. It is not a bottom-up process. It is a top-down process. It is the antithesis of our form of government. There's also a group that was created by the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program. And its goal is to get cities to buy into smart growth. And so it has a computer program. When the cities become members, they give these to the cities and to the county government for a fee. And then they start funneling them into the retrofitting, like Richardson, Texas, for example, now has bicycle lanes. On one street that I took my son to school on for years, now is bicycle lanes. I've never seen a bicycle on any of those lanes. But they got bicycle lanes because Complete Streets, Smart Growth says you're going to have bicycle lanes. But there are a myriad of other micromanaging plans that they have to control you and to take away your property rights. There were even people in Arlington, Texas, who went to their city council and said, we don't want these bicycle lanes in front of our house. We don't want it to hurt our property values. And the city council gavelled and said, we're putting them in anyway. So the people had a very peaceful recourse. They could go out and recruit someone to run against those who didn't have an ear to hear from their constituents. They were a top-down instead of a bottom-up form of government. But this whole plan, ICLEI, its acronym, you'll remember ICLEI. It's the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. What can be international and local all at the same time? But it's very telling. The international is telling the local what to do. That's what it is. But look at the cities in Texas that have gotten out of this. Garland, Texas has said, we're no longer going to be part of ICLEI. Texas City has gotten out of it. Bryan and College Station, Irving. Communities across Texas are getting out of it because they don't want to be having these ideas pushed down their throats anymore. Then there's a White House Council on Rural Americans because 16% of the people in this country live in rural America. Suburban and urban are already under the grasp of Agenda 21 and the central planning. But rural Americans are free. And so this White House Council, signed by Barack Obama, puts the Secretary of Agriculture in 25 departments, agencies, and offices. And look at what some of them are. Treasury, Defense, like, are they going to send the Army out to your ranch? I mean, what are we doing here? Housing and urban development, transportation, energy, of course, education, because they're brainwashing our kids with this nonsense. You go to the EPA website, the Environmental Protection Agency website, in education, and you will find the curriculum there that they have set out online for our children that teaches them a lie. And the lie is that when you burn fossil fuels, you're causing the climate to change. That is a bald-faced lie. The climate is changed by 3 things: ocean currents, winds, and sun activity, and man isn't going to do a thing about either one of those. But our children in their classrooms are being taught that by burning fossil fuels and by too many people on the earth breathing out, which, by the way, Carbon dioxide is only 0.038% of the air. Hardly anything. You ever heard of photosynthesis? So when carbon is emitted, and the more carbon there is, the better, because then more trees and plants grow. And then when they grow, what do they emit? Oxygen, photosynthesis. God has it all under control. But our children are being taught that because we are burning fossil fuels, that we are causing the climate to change. That is a hoax. That is a hoax. So, as is typical with this president in creating czars and doing whatever else he pleases outside the Constitution, whenever on this executive order he chooses to add more bureaucrats to the mix, he does it. No questions asked. So what can we do about it? We always, as Texans, want to be polite and respectful. Always. And then there are booklets that I have up here. You can buy them online at sovereignty.net, or I have them here for $5, the same price. And it gives you the information that you've heard tonight, plus more, so that if you want to go through it and read it yourself, highlight it, and even share it with an elected official, it will be an amazing education for yourself and for your elected officials. So I do offer those. It is rarely productive to mention the United Nations, but you know what? We don't have to. As soon as you go in talking about even smart meters, in Austin, they thought that Texas Eagle Forum had just grown horns. We're talking about smart meters. So you know what we did? Oh, this is brilliant. I thought it was. And I'm going to give credit to where it's due. Beth Biesel, the person who's leading this issue for us, got this Harvard business grad and a lawyer and an engineer and put on a briefing for legislators in Austin, in the Capitol. And got all the grassroots to call their legislators and get them to that meeting. We had about 80. There's 181 legislators altogether in Austin, but we got 80 of them to come and hear about smart meters. We're not nuts. We know what we're talking about on these issues, and we brought in the right people to be convincing. So anyway, we don't have to talk about the UN, though, when we talk about property rights and we talk about free markets. And typically with your elected official, you're not going to have to talk about, well, you know, this big Agenda 21 thing out there. But if you talk about private property rights and you talk about free markets, you're going to have everything in common with them. And our command, biblical directive, is to sit down and reason together. And that's what I hope that you will be happy to do with your legislators. But talk about those two things, private property rights and free markets. Is there a mandate for any part of this in state law? No. Unless Complete Streets is passed and is having a public hearing next week. How and why was the person or agency guiding the plan chosen? Typically, ICLEI, that organization I told you that's international and local, which is like, what? Will come into your county government or your city government, and they'll start talking to your elected official and telling them, you know, you really need to get reelected, and you need an incentive for people to vote for you. And so if you start talking about, you know, putting in bike lanes, and you start talking about putting in bike trails, and you start talking about putting in tanks here and there, you know, people will like you, and those will be, well, you know what? If the people want those things, the people will talk to you about them. You don't have to have ICLEI coming and whispering in somebody's ear. But sometimes these officials will listen because that's what they believe that their role is, and they'll be taken in. But once they realize that they are being taken in, then they don't want any part of it. Most of our elected officials are very, very good people. The last three are very important. How will the plan be enforced? How much will it cost? And where's the money coming from? Then you're talking about private property and free markets. So most, again, of your elected officials are going to be more than happy to sit down and reason with you if you go in with a reasonable approach. And so please do study more about this. Listen to what Lori has to say at future meetings, and you'll have plenty of local application. I appreciate you. You've been a really sweet sweet audience to me tonight, and I would love to hear your questions and your comments. I always learn from audiences, so please.
Could you put the previous slide back up?
Yes. Yes. Okay. This man over here first.
I've been doing some studying on new building and stuff, and the ones that write the codes for most cities around here is the International Code Council.
Yes.
You didn't say anything about that. Is it linked in any way?
Yes, it is.
I know Bill Clinton was the one who pushed the ICC.
Yes. Yes.
And that they're a non-governmental organization in the UN.
Yes.
And
great point.
But most of these city inspectors and the city councils don't have a clue what's going on. And I had an inspector tell me that he just really loved the property management code that they were getting from the ICC because it had teeth. And I said, have you ever read it? And I told him several things and read it, and he goes, oh, but we wouldn't enforce that. I said, yes, but the next tyrant would.
Well, and you can't pick and choose. You cannot pick and choose. That is what is so absolutely just upside down about this.
Well,
it's so wrong.
It's bothered me for such a long time. I guess my main question is, how do we talk to these city councils that don't even read the codes? And the ICC has people coming in to sell the codes to the cities, and on their websites they brag about all the municipalities that they have, and they want 100% of the municipalities in this country.
They do.
And they say, oh, well, these are just codes. We need a fire code. Most people don't realize that the Longview Fire Code has it in it the restriction of small arms ammunition. And I brought it up to one of the council members